Hi everyone, my name is Erik Adler, and today I watched Al Gore's new environmental documentary, an inconvenient sequel, Truth to Power, which is a follow-up of his 2006 film, An Inconvenient Truth. I liked that film quite a lot, and I also read the book, An Inconvenient Truth, years ago, and I had not been following this debate for some time actually, so I imagined the situation for the environment globally would be bad, but I had no idea it was this bad as what was shown in this film. It was very interesting. Al Gore is visiting many parts of the world. He's going to Greenland, to India and other places, and we also hear him giving a lecture to people who are then to teach about these environmental issues. He has been giving many such courses over the past years, and you can also see it in the movie that Al Gore is not just very informed about these issues, he knows a lot, he's also very invested, also emotionally. You can see him in the movie also become very emotional on a few occasions, and I think this is a good thing. He is a man who is not just very learned, he's also in these issues with heart and soul. He is fighting for the survival of the world, basically. Now, what does all this have to do with fantasy fiction? I think it has quite a lot to do with fantasy fiction. If we look historically, of course, one of the giants in the history of fantasy fiction is J.R.R. Tolkien, who was a kind of an early environmentalist, and his book, The Lord of the Rings, as we now know, also influenced the early environmental movement when it came out in the 50s, especially in the 60s, together with Frank Herbert's Dune, for example. And Tolkien was himself a conservative, but he was a green conservative, what we now call an eco-conservative. And this might seem a bit strange to some people. Al Gore is also a conservative, he's a Republican. How can he then be so engaged in fighting for the environment? Donald Trump, for example, don't give a heck about the environment. Obviously, on June the 1st this year, he announced that the US are withdrawing from the Paris climate agreement that a lot of countries signed in 2016, and the US are now withdrawing from this agreement, for which Al Gore had been fighting so hard, which is very sad, of course. But the thing is, Trump is not a conservative, and as a well-known British conservative philosopher, there are not that many, Roger Scruton, is arguing in his book How to Think Seriously About the Planet, the case for an environmental conservatism. Environmentalism is not a socialist issue at all, it's a conservative issue, because it's a question of saving the earth for future generations. And in fact, the worst destruction of the environment has been going on in communist countries, especially in the Soviet Union and in China. I will discuss this book by Roger Scruton in a later video, How to Think Seriously About the Planet, the case for an environmental conservatism, and also another book of his, England and Elegy, which of course sounds very conservative, where he writes about English history and culture and how this is slowly, or perhaps even fast, disappearing. I have already discussed the book called The Lord of the Rings and Philosophy on my channel. It was the first video that I did, and I will hopefully in my next video discuss a kind of sequel to that book, which is The Hobbit and Philosophy. So I'm coming back to Tolkien, and there are also reasons for this, because Tolkien is an interesting figure when it comes to these questions of environmental politics and environmental ethics. You can see it in The Lord of the Rings that it's, among other things, it's a book about the destruction of the environment. You have it also in the movies, if you prefer to watch the movies instead of reading the book, because it's very long. Of course, the movies are also very long, but you can see it also in the movies, for example, in the character of Saruman in the book and in the movies. Saruman is a person who is almost mad, has gone mad with greed. He lusts for the One Ring, he lusts for power, for domination, and the means of his reaching this goal is destroying the environment, cutting down the forests, building up an industry to build also weapons and armory and siege engines and so on for his troops. And this is something that we see today in many countries, not just in the US, not just in Donald Trump's, in many other countries, among many politicians who simply are prepared to risk the survival of the human species for their short-term economical interests and of course to please different lobby groups. And so I think that fantasy fiction has a lot to say about these issues, and this movie also really made me think again about these problems. And I wanted actually already a few years ago to write about these issues also in my own fantasy fiction, and by watching this movie I got now additional inspiration to include this kind of discussions in my future writing. These were a few thoughts about the topic of environmental politics and fantasy fiction with regards to this film by Al Gore, an inconvenient sequel, Truth to Power. I hope you enjoyed this. Feel free to leave your comments below what you thought about this little subjective comment or chat from my part. What you thought about the movie. If you saw it, I hope you did. We were in fact just 8 people in the movie theater, which I think is very sad, because this is a very important and interesting topic and a very interesting movie that I think as many people as possible should see. But I also think that fantasy fiction can have a lot to say about these issues. Fantasy fiction is, I think, perfect as a room for political satire and moral satire and social commentary. And I think such an important issue as environmental politics is something that fantasy fiction should be doing. As I said, I will come back to this topic in my discussion of Roger Scruton and in my discussion of the book The Hobbit and Philosophy. And until then, I wish you a good time, and I'll talk to you soon again.